I don't know if you know this, but RPGs are entering into a new golden era and explosion in popularity, and there's never been a better time to start playing than today. And if you've never played an RPG before and you're a newcomer to the genre, then you are in for a real treat because there are still some experiences that role-playing games can provide you that you can't get anywhere else. And it's why RPGs are my favorite genre of video games, and why I've dedicated the last 9 years of my life to reviewing RPGs, promoting them, and trying to help lower that barrier for entry to help encourage more people to play more RPGs. And if you're not really sure what I mean by RPG, that's okay, you're not alone. The RPG genre is pretty vast, and its name doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what to expect. In actuality, the RPG genre is actually a large superset of a lot of different genres that typically share a few common threads. Some of those common threads include your character becoming stronger as you engage in combat or resolve problems, and an emphasis on storytelling, of which the player may or may not be able to affect the direction of. But why should anyone play RPGs? For me personally, I love a really great story first and foremost. I love the idea of overcoming insurmountable odds, casts of well-developed characters, and unique worlds and degrees of character customization. I really enjoy the strategy involved in a lot of the combat systems, where sometimes combat feels less like a hectic frenzy and more like a game of chess where you have to plan out your moves several turns in advance. Games don't have to be RPGs to have these features, but the games that resonate most with me with these features tend to be RPGs. No other video game genre has given me that same sense of exploring, living, breathing fantasy and science fiction worlds. The only games that begin to resonate with me on that same level from other genres are the universally lauded and critically acclaimed games like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which just so also happens to feature a lot of role-playing game mechanics most of the time. There's actually a really good chance that the things you love about games in other genres are featured more often in RPGs. I also think that RPGs can be a catalyst for self-improvement. I would argue that video games in the role-playing game genre are a lot like reading a book. I've heard from several people who learned to read better by playing role-playing games, which often feature far more text dialogue than contemporary genres. In fact, I'm one of those people. Early on in my childhood, I was not particularly a strong reader. I was one of the worst in my first and second years of grade school. But after discovering RPGs and becoming obsessed with them, I not only closed that gap, but by grade 7, I was actually reading at a college level. Now, would that have happened if I were instead obsessed with platformers or first-person shooters? I don't know. But I kinda doubt it. At risk of sounding maybe self-aggrandizing, I think that a lot of players in the RPG genre tend to also just be good people in general. I believe that role-playing games tend to get a player thinking more about character motivations. So to get the most out of role-playing games, players really need to put themselves into the shoes of others. Playing each new RPG to some degree is an exercise in empathy. Now, it might not necessarily be that RPGs give players stronger empathy for one another. It could just be that it's a personality trait that tends to attract people to the genre. Again, though, from my experience, I used to be a pretty violent kid. I used to get in fights a lot, I had rage issues, I got sent home with daily behavior notes from school every day. I kinda doubt anybody would suspect that of me today, but it was a real problem. It's not anymore, and some of that I think has to do with RPGs. Another thing that RPGs helped me early on with was the escapism that they could provide, which is a common aspect that people love about RPGs. Being able to be transported out of your world with all of your real-world problems that feel so out of your control, and then transported to a different world with other problems that seem insurmountable, but then you find out eventually, gradually, that they are able to be overcome. RPGs can help provide people with distractions that contain messages of hope. So that's why a lot of people love RPGs and why you might want to start playing them, but where do you even get started? That's kind of the tricky part. But I think that the trick is finding an entry point that will jive with your own personal interests and preferences. One of the incredible things is that because the RPG genre is such an incredibly wide and broad genre, there's almost a guarantee to be an RPG out there perfectly suited to help bring you into the world of RPGs. According to Statista, shooters are pretty consistently the most popular genre of video games in the United States and worldwide across several years. So if you're into first-person shooters, there's actually a really good entry point for you into the RPG genre in the Fallout series, as long as you go into it with the right expectations anyway. Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas are my favorites in the series, but Fallout 4 is even more accessible to newcomers of the genre. These games are essentially first-person shooters with less emphasis on player skill and more emphasis on engaging, tongue-in-cheek storytelling, getting to explore and understand a post-apocalyptic world and all of its inhabitants, and character customization from the initial character creation to what kinds of armor to equip, or what kinds of weapons and guns to use, and even what mods to perform to some of your weapons in certain titles. If you want to be a gunslinger in the wild wastelands of the irradiated Mojave Desert, you can do that. If you want to be an elite sniper picking off enemies from a distance, well, you can do that too. You can be a good guy or a bad guy. You can be a sneaky, thieving hacker who wields a sledgehammer. You can do that too. For alternate recommendations, you can also check out the Mass Effect series, which is set in a higher tech sci-fi sort of setting out in space. The second most popular genre in the world is the action-adventure genre, which is about as broad of a genre as the RPG genre is. And luckily, there's a lot of crossover between the two genres. So if you're into the Zelda series, for instance, which straddles the RPG line already, then the action RPG genre is actually a pretty fantastic place to start. For instance, if you enjoy the older Zelda titles, then Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, and Trials of Mana, which are available today bundled in the Collection of Mana, are a stellar place to dip your toes further into the genre. But if you like modern Zelda games, then I might instead recommend the more modern Ys titles, Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana and Ys 9 Monstrum Nox, which also features faster action-based combat and more emphasis on storytelling and less emphasis on the puzzle-solving elements. Alternatively, games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring feature far more methodic action combat with an emphasis on player skill. But if you really just want to focus more on that whole puzzle-solving side, then maybe looking into Alundra on PlayStation 1 could scratch that itch. The most popular video game franchise worldwide currently is actually Pokémon, which is, for the most part, a turn-based RPG in the Monster Trainer subgenre. This RPG series is particularly light in the storytelling aspect, so some people don't even realize that the game is part of the genre. But if you happen to be part of Pokemon's enormous fanbase, you've already got an incredible leg up. If you're into Pokemon because you love the Pokemon and its world, then you may be surprised to find out that there's a number of spin-off Pokemon titles that explore other RPG genres, such as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. But if you just enjoy the monster collecting mechanics of Pokemon and like building up a team of allies to fight alongside you, the original Monster Trainer series are still being produced by Atlus, most recently with their Shin Megami Tensei 5. This RPG combines Monster Trainer elements from the Pokemon games and vast world exploration found in Zelda's Breath of the Wild, and then throws in some post-apocalyptic settings for a good measure. The SMT series is pretty notorious for being pretty difficult, but if you play on easy mode, at least to get you started, I think fans of Pokemon in search of something a bit more mature can really find something great to sink their teeth into here. But beyond just tie-ins of other video game genres that you might be familiar with, there are a number of literary and cinematic genres that the RPG genre crosses over with as well. Fans of horror might be intrigued to find out that the original Resident Evil series has roots in an 8-bit RPG called Sweet Home, or if you just like the thematic elements of horror, you might find that Koudelka or Parasite Eve on PlayStation 1 are more your speed. Weird question here, but are you into golf? Because there's an RPG out there called Golf Story on the Nintendo Switch, which is inspired by the series of Mario Golf RPGs made by Camelot. Camelot also made Mario Tennis RPGs as well, so if you're into those, check them out. Are you surprised to hear that there's a couple of Mario RPGs? Because there's actually a ton of them that aren't even sports games at all. Super Mario RPG was the first back in the day on the Super Nintendo, but if you like your turn-based Mario RPG combat with a crafty aesthetic instead, then the Paper Mario RPGs are a solid recommendation. Or if you want to see Mario and his brother Luigi going on some wacky adventures like something out of an episode of The Magic School Bus, then maybe Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story would be an absolutely stellar time for your oddly specific tastes. And despite everything I've said, there's a very good chance that none of what I've just said here applies directly to you specifically though. If you're looking for a way into the genre, I'd invite you to leave a comment down below to help find the perfect starter game for you. And I think you'll get the best results if you include just a few of these important pieces of information, starting with what kind of games do you play right now? Like what kind of games are you interested in right now, and what about them appeals to you? Second of all, what other interests do you have? Genres, books, TV shows, etc.? And third, do you prefer something more serious or something more lighthearted and kind of funny? And then finally, what systems do you currently have available to play on? With that to help you get started, the RPG community and I will do our best to help make some recommendations for a good place for you to start playing RPGs. And to my viewers who already love RPGs, it would really mean a lot to me if you could also help lend your experiences in helping newcomers find their perfect starter RPGs by helping respond to requests. I don't know how many questions we'll get, but it could be a whole lot. And if you're new here and you want to learn more about RPGs, get subscribed because I'm SuperDerek. I make a bunch of thoughtful and thought-provoking videos for gamers who love RPGs and want to learn more about them in order to help lower the barriers for entry for newcomers. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, everyone.